Today on Leaf by Leaf, The EYELID by S.D. Chrostowska. This book was sent to me from the Toronto-based publisher Coach House Books. The first thing that seized my attention about this book, its physical construction, were the leaves. As soon as my fingers came into contact with these pages, I knew something was a bit different. Something stood out about this book. The pages have a rich creaminess that I've seen many times before, but tactilely, there's a pleasing ribbed texture. In the back of the book, it explains that it was printed on Zephyr antique laid paper, which was manufactured acid-free in second growth forests of Saint-Jérôme, Quebec. It was printed with vegetable-based ink on a 1973 Heidelberg cord offset litho press. This is a really smart choice on the publisher's part, because it really sets the book apart, and it indulges my love for the physical text. I'm a sucker for the Luddite novel. Give me anything that rails against the ruination of humanity in exchange for technological advancements we don't need, and I'm as happy and agitated as my teenage self reading Walden for the first time. I'm also a sucker for books written by professors, and with the EYELID, I get both the Luddite novel and a book written by a professor. Barth, Gass, Echo, the list goes on. And now I can add S.D. Chrostowska. It takes the form of a utopia wrapped in a dystopia, as the publisher calls it on their trailer for the book, which I'll link below. S.D. Chrostowska is a professor in the graduate program in social and political thought at York University in Toronto. In addition to numerous academic publications, she previously published an inventive epistolary novel with Dalkey Archive in 2013. I would take time to list all of her accolades here, but I want to get to the book. Let's just suffice it to say that she's smarter than both of us. Paris is now the capital of Greater America, a universal state in the near future. The totalitarian regime has figured out how to prohibit sleep and daydreaming, or reverie, to further the productivity of its citizens. Like Soma in Huxley's Brave New World, which blankets over any form of discontent and unhappiness to make the state's citizens pliable. Here we have a drug called podium, which sustains the health of its users while eliminating their need for sleep, which the government has deemed the new opium of the masses. As another means of keeping these dream-prohibited masses servile, there is a Westworld-esque virtual reality called comprehensive illusion that allows people to indirectly fulfill their dreams in a state-regulated environment. A revolutionary named Chevauché approaches our unnamed narrator, who is a dreamer in the romantic and literal sense of the word, and leads him on a Virgilian tour through Onirica, a world built on dreams, which Chevauché hopes to establish as the opposition to the totalitarian state. Many different voices crossed my mind as I read this book. Casares, Borges, Philip K. Dick, Voltaire, Camus, Orwell, Huxley, even Lovecraft flitted through my mind as I read a particular passage of the narrator's thoughts concerning Chevauché. It had that feel of the narrator in Lovecraft's From Beyond, as he writes about Crawford Tillinghast. But these writers are only shadows around the work. Chrostowska has forged her own style. It's a small book and therefore highly concentrated in its thesis. The unnamed narrator becomes our guide just as Chevauché is his guide. The unemployed, narcoleptic narrator works on multiple levels. First, he is precisely the type of person the universal state of Greater America despises. That is, a dreamer. Second, he is precisely the type of person that Chevauché needs to develop his utopia. And still on another level, the narrator is poetically inclined, which helps to counterbalance Chevauché's often dry and didactic discourse. The result confirms that Chrostowska is adept as both professor and poet. We get lines of sharp imagery delivered in luscious prose right from the opening paragraph. Come autumn, the eyes reap color against the lengthening shadows, and the night that seals them closed, as if nature, having already given spring to love and summer to leisure, made a season especially for dreamers, its days hazy and heavy-lidded, its evenings haloed and smudged by rain, the hours' hypnotic passage sleeping all who, dazed and doubled in themselves, fall leaf-like under its spell. We also get these beautiful lines of rich scansion, such as, when the air was clearer, crisper, where the grass was grizzled by frost. And such atmospheric punches as, white silence fell around me in flakes. And perhaps my favorite figuration, I shivered as I uttered these words, feeling upon me the breath of approaching night, in whose cavernous mouth I caught sight of the uvular pendant of a waterfall. The closing sentences, too, are delivered in a manner that brings an ache to the chest for its poignant beauty, but you'll have to read the book to get the full thrust of its power. The majority of the novel is dedicated to Chevauchè's exposition, his oniric ideas, his manifesto, his plans for Onirica's revolution. It is thus a novel more of ethos than pathos, stimulating thought more than emotion. As the narrator says of him, many of Chevauchè's teachings were hard to take in large drafts, nor did he bother to sweeten them. But in his tireless animation, he would sometimes shift from the often dry critical register to something like poetry. Thus, the book too is serialized into small sips of chapters, emulating the narrator's processing and synthesizing of these thoughts. The best way to approach the book is as an innovation of the Platonic dialogue, with Chevauchè as Socrates, and the narrator as one of many Platonic devil's advocates. The narrator acts as a fulcrum to balance Chevauchè's extended treatise on dreaming as the last bastion of personal freedom, and the way in which his utopia can redeem this besieged front. These fragments of his rich philosophy are drawn from the author's obvious critical thinking on the subject. Fantasy, or the death of imagination, egyrocracy, or the regime of total wakefulness, and narcopolis, a community of sleepers. Chrostowska's stringing of academic jargon gives a legitimacy to the book that blurs the certainty of whether or not this really is fiction. I had to slow down and, well, think. This is a novel of ideas, not a simple theoretical thriller that flares in your mind as an ephemeral conjecture and then fizzles out. The EYELID's ideas are potent and beg real consideration. The argument presented in the book is a crucial one. As we become more and more reliant on technology, we can slowly begin to impose the same expectations of immediacy, precision, and endurance onto human beings. In the book, the points about insomnia and workaholism as national values are particularly relevant. The worker who works his or herself to the bone is valued much higher than the worker who simply fulfills the expectations of the job. Going above and beyond is the new average, and the bar is steadily creeping higher. As for thinkers and artists, I recall David Denby's telling statement from his book, Great Books, where he says, "In America, a grown man or woman reading at home during the day is not a person to be taken seriously." Points on this debate have also been expounded in Bertrand Russell's 1932 essay In Praise of Idleness, where he argues for the 4-hour workday and traces out the origins and developments of labor as a virtue and leisure as waste. I also think of perhaps Freud's best essay, Creative Writers and Daydreaming. The apparently unpopular argument, however, goes that a worker could produce higher quality work in less time if they are given ample time for leisure and rest, as opposed to the coffee-addled, bleary-eyed workforce that yawns its way through an 8-hour-plus workday, eking out mediocre work. But try it out with your manager and see how far you get. One of the most chilling moments in the EYELID occurs when the narrator finds himself drifting off and people grab his shoulder and tell him to wake up. He remarks, "They were just ordinary passers-by, citizens doing their duty to the state." The EYELID, in its very title, evokes that thin fold that separates wakefulness and dreaming, that veil between two worlds. The world is an eyeball in space which nothing projects, we are told near the end. That is, the world has been shorn of its lids, its means for dreaming, and thus the final space of personal freedom has been vanquished. And for those of us who, like the narrator, decide to rally against the great appropriation of dreaming and reverie, we may well find ourselves immersed in the same irony as the narrator. He becomes so busy running his narcopolis as a merchant of sleep that he has no time for sleeping himself. In a telling statement, my eyelid twitched uncontrollably. I hope you consider getting a copy of the EYELID, and I really hope you love it as much as I did.